Hello, friends, and welcome to the space. We'll begin our time together by lighting a candle and reminding ourselves that the Lord is present. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You alone, O Lord, are holy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wounds today. Father Richard Rohr says two primary ways to transformation, which I believe as disciples of Jesus, that's part of what we're about. Transforming ourselves, transforming the world, all the work of God, all by the grace of God, yet we are willing participants in it. But Father Rohr says that two primary ways to this transformation is great love and great suffering. And I believe in Jesus's life and ministry, he shows us over and over again what great love looks like. And it's through the lens of the crucifixion that we also see the suffering of Jesus. And likewise, as I said, a gateway to transformation. And I especially noticed it in the gospel lessons, Sunday lectionaries. So for last Sunday as well as this Sunday. Last Sunday, the wounds of Jesus popped out a couple of times in John chapter 20, when the disciples are huddled in an upper room for fear. Jesus comes in through a locked door and says, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. And then you may recall after that, the disciples, after Jesus had left, the risen Christ had left, the disciples told Thomas, who wasn't able to be there, "Guess what? We saw the Lord." And Thomas said, "If I can't put my fingers in the wounds and his hands and his side, I'm not going to believe." And then wouldn't you know, the next week, when Thomas is in that upper room, Jesus again appears and says, "Peace be with you." And then he says to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." The wounds. And then we go to this yesterday's gospel lesson from Luke chapter 24. And again, the risen Christ presents himself to the disciples and says, "Peace be with you." And the disciples are startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. So Jesus says to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. So again, a display of the wounds that he bore, the suffering that he bore. And my thought about this is the way we ourselves can utilize our suffering, our woundedness, and let it be a place of transformation. Let it be a place where redemption can be shown. And it's a subtle work of the Spirit, of course, because for us, when the wounds are raw and open, our wounds can actually be a place that instills fear in others, where we insist, look at this, look at what's happened to me. People can back away from that, and then it's not an inviting, healing space. Instead, it's a terrifying space. Or it can feel like a space, like back in college, my friend had a friend who would always try to one-up anybody around him, or he would say, oh, well, I ran a race in 10 minutes or something. And he would say, oh yeah? Oh yeah? Well, my buddy could do it in 9 minutes. Or, my friend could eat 15 hot dogs in a minute. Oh yeah? Well, my buddy could eat 20 hot dogs in a minute. So he always had this competitive edge to it. And so when you're competing, and I know those were kind of silly examples, but when you're competing on levels of suffering, levels of woundedness, that's not a redemptive space. If you're trying to somehow say that my suffering is worse than yours could ever be, and you could never understand, then it's not a safe, healing kind of space. But when you're able to, that your wounds are not raw, open, gaping wounds, but you've had some healing there, which has fostered compassion, understanding, empathy within yourself, then you come to a place where you don't even need to speak about your own woundedness to be able to enter into a space with someone else who is wounded and simply be present to that person as they process, as they heal, as they share their story. Then that space can become a redemptive space, a space where the risen Christ is sharing his wounds, and it's a place for hope and peace and grace. Now, this idea of a wounded healer was first proposed by Carl Jung, a psychologist, back in the 1930s, I believe, early-ish 20th century. And then Henry Nouwen, a priest, kind of expounded upon that. And I would like to read to you a writing of his from the book Bread for the Journey. And he talks about wounded healers. So listen to his words. Nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. Jesus is God's wounded healer. Through his wounds, we are healed. Jesus' suffering and death brought joy and life. His humiliation brought glory. His rejection brought a community of love. As followers of Jesus, we can also allow our wounds to bring healing to others. And he names something important there as well. That for many of us, especially when the wound is fresh and raw, we want to hide it from others and not talk about it. Or we talk about it in a way that's terrifying and creates distance with others. So the invitation to us all is to be able to acknowledge our wounds, to not hide them, but to live with them openly in a way that does not put others off, in a way that invites redemption, invites healing, invites, I'm looking for his words, put our woundedness in the service of others. I think that's the key. So I know, as he says, there are all kinds of ways that we are wounded in life. And as we are able to face those wounds, as we're able to hold those wounds in the light of Christ, allow those wounds to be healed, we too can become agents of healing ourselves. So, those are the thoughts for the day. I pray that you would be able to live with your wounds, If there are some that are too deep, too painful for you right now, I understand that too. And I hope you are able to find safe space where those wounds can begin to air out, where you can begin to tell your stories and begin to receive that healing that your soul, body, mind needs so much. So thank you for this time together, and peace be with you.